All right. Hi, everyone. We're going to give people a second to hop on in, and then I will go ahead and hit record. But if you are joining us, welcome, welcome. We're so excited to be here with Melissa Kaiser. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. We have on our toolbar over here, if you are looking for Spanish translation, go ahead down to the vertical toolbar. You'll see a puzzle piece. You can click on that and get Spanish translation. If you're looking for closed captioning, you're going to go down to the horizontal toolbar under the PowerPoint, and you'll see the CC closed captioning. We are so excited to have Melissa here with us. Melissa, I don't know if we want to wait maybe just one more minute, or if you want to start to introduce yourself. I know time is precious, so I'm going to go ahead and click record. But we are so thankful. If anyone has questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat or into the Q&A box so that they don't get lost as our chat gets going.
Yes, and we'll do most questions at the end, but if there is something pertinent to that slide or something that needs to be repeated, then we will absolutely make sure to answer those questions. So welcome, everybody. So I will just do a quick intro before we dig in. Typically, this training can be like 2 to 4 hours. So if I feel like I'm cramming a bunch of stuff in, please reach out to me if there is a resource or something you missed, you want more information. So I just relocated about a year ago from North Dakota to Florida. And so I'm a licensed social worker. I have a history of working with treatment foster care, youth, psychiatric and addictions. And my expertise is in human trafficking. I helped start the Human Trafficking Task Force in North Dakota. I was the first trafficking navigator hired there. So I worked with victims and survivors. I came up with protocol and developed teams and was the first point of contact. So had a lot of exposure to a lot of high stress and a lot of traumatic situations through all of those jobs. But then prior to moving, I helped our state law enforcement agency create their first victim witness program. So done a lot. Excited to be in Florida. Now I just work for myself. I do a lot of human trafficking training and consulting. And with that, I do this training, this secondary traumatic stress. I just realized over years of working with teams of various disciplines how important this conversation was. It really just became a passion of mine and something I dug into. So here we are. I wanted to start with this quote. I'm sure some of you have seen it. I think it's very important just to start the conversation by reminding ourselves of this. The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. I think it's so important to look at this, to reread it, to take a picture of it and print it and put it on your wall, because I think in the helping profession or within first responder type of jobs, we feel like we can't also have hard days, like we can't struggle like our clients or our patients do. It would be weird if we didn't, right? Because we care about people. We're passionate about helping our communities. And so certainly then we're going to feel something from that, right? We're going to have a reaction or an effect from that. And so understanding that you get secondary trauma or compassion fatigue, not because you did something wrong, but you get it because you care. And so it's going to be something very common that you experience throughout your profession. And you'll see those next to you struggle and have tough days as well. So the reason I named this Newton's Law, I didn't come up with that idea. There's a book called Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement by Dr. Kevin Gilmartin. And that's where I heard this, and it really just stuck with me, and it helped kind of give me a visual for this whole concept of Newton's Law. And so before I dig into that, when you look at compassion fatigue or secondary traumatic stress, it's natural. It's disruptive. It's a byproduct of working with traumatized clients, and it's observable. Okay. So when we work with people who have been traumatized, we also might mirror the symptoms of trauma ourselves, or PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder ourselves, in most of our professions. So the symptoms will include a combination of cognitive, behavioral, emotional, and physical features. Therefore, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So when we go back to the thought of Newton's Law, the way I broke this down is we're constantly at high stress levels, right? We're in survival mode during our jobs during the day, and we go home assuming that we return to normal functioning, but we actually don't. Sometimes we're still very hyper vigilant or kind of on or alert when we get home. Some of us struggle with depression or anxiety. Sometimes we have addictions, right? We have negative coping mechanisms when we get home, or frankly, we're just not ourselves and we're not doing well. And basically, when our actions or our daily experiences at work expose us to trauma, we have to assume there's going to be a reaction or a result that impacts us. So, again, pulling that Newton's law in. And basically, we're stuck on high or low at all times. And so, it's more about learning that about ourselves. And then, what do we do to become resilient to that, right? What do we do when we start noticing these things in ourselves and our colleagues? And one thing I certainly want to mention is for those of you here, thank you for attending the session and give yourself a pat on the back, because oftentimes it's our role, well, most of the time it's our role to help people, right? And so to take time out to really focus on ourselves by attending this session, just give yourself a pat on the back, because that's hard for us. We're always doing for others over ourselves. And so I just want you all to take a moment to just say, like, yay me, because you're taking care of yourself today just by attending this session. And I think that's really impressive. So, to really dig in, I want you to start thinking about this, even bring this home. These questions, bring this to your team at work. How has this work changed you? How has it changed your views on the world? What happens when you hear stories at work, and were you trained for it? And so when I have more time, I give a bazillion examples of this. But and if you guys want to type some of your answers in the chat, so one another can kind of look at some of the similarities and things that they might notice, or kind of normalize this issue, please feel free. For me specifically, I think the change for myself can be positive and negative. Like many of you, you probably are more alert or aware and can help people stay safe in the world, or just have a perspective of the world that makes you appreciate life more sometimes, or makes you feel like you're safer because you're so much more aware of the world. On the flip side, I think I'm cynical. I think I look at most situations and see like what the potential issue could be, or what the negative or the scary part of that could be. Um, and when I think about primarily my work in human trafficking, what it's changed on my views of the world in shifting my thought process is I have a really hard time trusting men. Um, Most of the predators or the offenders in my work have been males. And so I think for me, that's just really been something I have to be aware of, because most of my best friends actually are men. And so I know that that's irrational and that's not true, but there is a shift in my mind on how I view the world, how I view men in the world. And so thinking for yourself, kind of what has shifted in how you view the world because of your job. And then ask yourself if it's kind of hard to think about that. Let's say you were a financial analyst or a car mechanic or a nail technician. Would you see the world the same as you do now in your job? Okay, so thinking about, if I never went into this type of work and did something else, how would I see the world? Okay. So when you think about it that way, it might help think like, wow, I would have never known these things or thought this way. One example I give in a video, I don't have time to show today, but I could certainly put it in the chat. I went to a softball tournament a few years ago, and at the end of the first day, most people, like, it's kind of a big party, right? Everyone on the softball field has many beers, and you talk to a bunch of people, and it's kind of this big thing in this community back in North Dakota. And I remember sitting down with my softball team. I cracked my first beer and I looked around, and my first thought was, I wonder how many girls are going to get raped here tonight. And I would think for you that that's not unusual to hear for a lot of you. Like, you have these like thoughts that way, that most people would never think about, that would even cross their mind. But for us, it's just that first thought that we don't even always realize we're thinking. Okay. And then what do you do with the stories at work? I like to say, for me, I used to do a lot of what I call word vomit. When I like to process things, I process out loud. Even though my colleagues do the same type of work as me, that doesn't mean they want to hear all the gory details in the lunchroom, okay, or over beers after work. And so I had to learn about myself, like, I'm re-traumatizing people by processing out loud and word vomiting all of these things. And on the flip side, people sometimes stuff it all away, right? They might not process it. They might not staff it in supervision how they're feeling, that it all just gets locked up inside. And then what happens to that? So think about for yourselves, what do you do with those stories? And then were you trained for this? And I like to think of this in two ways. Were you trained on compassion fatigue and secondary trauma? I know in social working school, I wasn't, right? It's not something that we talked about then. Certainly law enforcement wasn't, medical professionals, legal providers, anything like that. And I also think with your job, were you trained to do the tasks at your job? Because if you feel very burnt out just with like day to day, I don't even know how to input client data into the system, or I don't even know how to work the fax machine. I don't have person-centered trauma informed training to work with clients. If you don't even have kind of the training that you need, that you feel adequate to do your job, it's going to burn you out quicker. And then you're also going to potentially suffer from, this compassion fatigue and secondary trauma, which we're going to dig into. So when we break all this down, there's many terms that are different that I feel like we clump under burnout, but is not burnout. So secondary trauma is a lot of what we're talking about today, but other terms that we might experience are PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, compassion fatigue, and burnout from the job. You can have all of these at the same time. You can have one at a time. They can come, they can go, but they are all different. And so we're going to break those down. Very simply, burnout can happen at any job. I think that's an important discrepancy to make. It might be like overworked, underpaid. You just don't like the job. You're not passionate about it. You don't feel purpose. Maybe you're frustrated going to work. You don't have good working conditions. Maybe you don't get good supervision. But burnout can happen any type of job. It doesn't have to be in like the type of profession we have, working with people and holding that high stress, high responsibility for people's livelihoods. So sometimes burnout would go away if you just got a different job. Okay. Because it's just that job that you're frankly just kind of sick of and just exhausted from. Secondary trauma is something that happens gradually over time when we hear about the trauma that the people we work with experience and endure. This is where, think about that worldview shift, okay? When you start viewing the world differently because of this job, because of the things you're constantly hearing all the time. Thoughts become intrusive, like me playing softball and thinking about how many girls are going to be raped, right? That's an intrusive thought. My new intrusive thought is I have a 4-month-old daughter, and when I change her diaper, I think about some of the cases I had in trafficking or child exploitation where the victims were as young as my daughter. And so those are sometimes intrusive thoughts now I have, which is absolutely secondary trauma. It's difficult, repeated exposure to stories and situations, right, of the clients and patients we work with. It impacts our own sense of self. And again, like I said before, it also carries similar symptoms to the victims that we work with that have trauma. So we start to experience symptoms that the people we work with have too. Shifting to compassion fatigue, this is more of like if you have burnout and secondary trauma symptoms, or it's like, I'm kind of overworked, underpaid, and I have a worldview shift, then you start to feel like impatient and irritable, right? Because you hear the same things over and over again. It's kind of like when your client calls and you want to put yourself on mute and like type your notes from the week, right? Because you're just exhausted of providing compassion for people because that's all we do. Another word for it is empathic strain. So you can see even what the terms mean, compassion fatigue and empathic strain. We start to predetermine our clients and our cases. We forget that people are individuals and we kind of just say, oh, this is the same as everything else, right? So we stop really caring or focusing on the person because we're just exhausted of it, that we start to just not. And one thing that I really focus on, once we experience this loss in empathy because of compassion fatigue, a hard question to ask is thinking about someone coming in for your help. Okay. You have a new client, a new patient, and they come in and you're the person that they see. Would you want that help? So thinking about yourself and how would it feel to be your own client? And sometimes the answer to that isn't what we want, but we need to have those honest conversations with ourselves because we care about the people we work with. And if we're further traumatizing them, if we're further impacting their mental health because we're not in a healthy place, then kind of where's our passion that we came into this profession with, and what do we do to get that back? Because none of us would want to damage our clients. But if we don't take care of ourselves first, we do. And so again, that's why you should pat yourself on the back for being here, because you are taking time to make sure you're healthy so you're at your best self for the clients that you work with. And then PTSD, as you all know, that's a mental health diagnosis, right? So it's kind of like when your symptoms get so persistent that they impact your daily functioning. You might start to have flashbacks. You might start to avoid certain cases, certain places. You have recurrent stress and anxiety. Maybe you have things like night terrors. Okay. So it's again thinking about, is this really impacting my daily functioning to the point where it could even be a mental health diagnosis? And lastly, I just added this not long ago because I felt like there's still something missing, right? There's still more that impacts us in the work, and it's moral injury. It's thinking about the damage done to one's conscience or moral compass when that person perpetuates, witnesses, or fails to prevent acts that transgress your own moral beliefs, values, or ethical codes of conduct. So some examples, let's say as law enforcement, you use deadly force and it causes harm or death to civilians. Maybe it was an accident, maybe there wasn't another alternative, but that's going to conflict with your own morals. Maybe as a supervisor, you give an order that results in the injury or death of somebody. Okay. Maybe you work in a psychiatric and addictions hospital where sometimes the patients might harm you. And so there are things there to think about, like what are decisions that can be made that are really important that later on you might think, wow, that was not morally, like I didn't feel good about that. Failing to report a sexual assault or a rape against someone that you knew. Reporting information on a client. This one has been really hard for me, and you all know what that's like when you finally gain trust of a client or a patient and you finally break through, and then something happens and you have to report it. And even though it's anonymous, maybe that they're going to know it's you, and that what damage will that do for their trust and their relationship that you've built. That's really done a number on me in terms of compassion fatigue. Following orders that from a supervisor, maybe that weren't right? They were against code or against policy at the place you worked. And it was kind of this conflict between, well, I have to listen to my boss, or do I go against the rules? What do I do? A change in beliefs about maybe a step you took or a decision that you made. And later on, this keeps me up at night still. Maybe back in my early social work days, if I discharge someone from programming, there are people I still think about, like, wow, was that the right choice? Are they okay? Did I really damage them? And then betrayal by a trusted colleague, that conflict too of the trust you had for somebody, and it really just impacted you. And now it's kind of like, well, now what? My beliefs about this person or this agency are really conflicting with me because of what happened. So kind of pulling this in to say, where does this also impact my level of compassion fatigue? So something else to look into when we talk about moral injury, those are those emotions that you feel, right? Like I was saying, I have regret, I have grief or sorrow or shame from the people I've worked with, and decisions I could have made differently, or a decision I didn't want to make but knew I had to. Then when you look at PTSD, that hypervigilance, as you know, with traumatized clients, there's a lot of memory loss there. Fear starts to come in, those flashbacks. And then, looking at what happens when we combine the two, which oftentimes can happen to us. These are the things that come out of that. We get angry, we get anxiety, we start to self-medicate. In our types of professions, these things are very common. These are quotes from people I worked with in this program, whether I provided training to them or they were just on my team back in North Dakota when I created those teams for trafficking, and things that I might have heard when I was trying to be there for them or check in. Hey, how are you doing? I miss feeling my emotions. Okay. That came from a jail administrator who said, whether it was a victim who was arrested and they told me about their story, that's horrific, and I'm just kind of like stonewall to it, or something happens to my kid that I should cry about and I just can't. Like, I miss emoting. Another law enforcement officer told me our heads kill more of us than IEDs and gunfire. So just thinking about the impact that that has on you, that he even said, my brain basically is more damaging to me than the danger I put myself in the military and in my job. I am mean to my kids. I am married to my job. I have a hard time relaxing. Gory scenes in movies don't faze me. Nobody's redeemable, right? We're just kind of defeated. Again, that compassion fatigue. Nobody I work with is redeemable. I had empathy when I first started this job. If I do not respond, someone will die. So, kind of that control, that need for control. I'll come back to that one. Heavy drinkers drive the cop car, alcoholics sit in the back. And then these three I hear a lot from the teams I work with. It is what it is. I'm good. We might have had a hard case and I called after, hey, how are you doing? I'm fine. This is the job. I just have to deal with it. Or people saying, oh, toughen up their skin, right? Throw them to the wolves. We all have to learn that way. We have to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and get over it. We signed up for this. And certainly, yeah, we did sign up for it, but that doesn't mean we were prepared for what we were going to see and how it was going to impact us. And that's the part that's not okay. And what we see a lot culturally in our jobs is that mentality of when they, when we get someone new, just throw them in, toughen up their skin. They got to see it versus preparing them for that. And we want the people we work with to be resilient, to have tools, to be prepared that this will happen. My quote was somebody is going to die if I don't respond. So when I realized for me, this was really impacting me. I had a youth traffic victim that was in California and she needed to get back to North Dakota. They had said she needs to discharge immediately. I had nowhere for her to go. And I was up all night trying to figure this out. And my partner said to me, there's nothing else you can do. Like, it's 1 a.m. You've called everybody. You have a plan. Like, Melissa, you have to go to bed. Like, there's nothing else you can do. And I started crying, and I'm not a crier. Take that back. Before I was pregnant and now have a 4-month-old daughter, I was not a crier. And for me, what I realized, because I started crying and I said this, if I don't respond, someone's going to die. I had no idea that was buried in me somewhere, because like you, probably many of you, I've lost clients or patients, whether to suicide, homicide, overdose. And I guess inside of me, I felt like if I don't control the situation, if I don't continue to feel like I'm being helpful, she's going to die. And I, again, didn't know that was there. And so for me, it was like, whoa, I needed to take a step back and think about like how this work was impacting me. So then there's this thought of what are we even doing, right? Because as you all know, the helping profession does feel defeating and discouraging. Sometimes we don't get the supervision we need or the acknowledgement we need. Clients blame us for everything, right? There's not a ton of acknowledgement. We certainly don't get paid millions of dollars, right? We take, again, a lot of blame. There's a lack of resources, or there's lacks of plans within your team. We really kind of blur the lines between things that matter versus things that I can control, right? We have to kind of look at where that overlaps. What matters? What can I control? Think about that tiny part, but we just take it all on. And then we, again, feel discouraged or defeated. And then we don't utilize the services we have at our agency. If you are in leadership, think about, are you sure that everyone at your agency is well aware of like the EAP or the free mental health that you have at your agency? Are you mentioning it often? Are you making sure they understand that things are confidential? If not, that's something that should be very normalized and sent out often with resources. If you don't have that at your agency and you're in leadership, I would certainly look at that. And if you also are not in leadership, advocating for that, because we should all have access to that. And again, we feel like if we need help, we're weak or we can't do this job. A lot of as mental health providers as well, therapists need therapists. Therapists use therapists. I went to my therapist yesterday and it's great. So I think sometimes just breaking down that stigma and shame of feeling like I need help, because everybody benefits from it. And that's okay. That again is taking care of yourself so you can take care of those around you. So this is just a visual. If I have more time, I like to use it to talk about different things. So this might be something to bring back to your team as well. How does something little explode? Again, think of my example of little things over time, or a few deaths here and there that I just kind of stuffed away, didn't grieve enough or think through or process, became this explosion of me working till 1 a.m. and bawling because in my head, this girl was going to die, right? What else that could look like is the toxicity in a workplace. A lot of times what happens with compassion fatigue and secondary trauma and burnout is if our agencies aren't being super supportive, or we just have a really tough week of something that happened that just kind of keeps building. If we're not taking care of our team and our organization when the little things trickle and happen, at some point it's going to blow over and it's going to become an unhealthy work environment. It's going to become a bigger issue because we're not taking care of ourselves in that moment. So a belief wheel, this is something you can use at home and at work. I would love if everybody took this back to their agency and use this in like your next team meeting or staffing. Think about beliefs we carry that we reassure ourselves of that are maybe irrational. So the quote I showed you, nobody's redeemable. Okay. Maybe that's your belief at this point because you have so much erosion of your empathy, or you're so compassion fatigued. So nobody's redeemable. That's your belief. What might your thoughts be? Okay. And if you feel like chatting about that, please do. Nobody's redeemable. My thought might be, I'm not going to work very hard on this case. This is hopeless or pointless, or what am I doing? This person isn't worth my time. This person's just going to relapse. Okay. So, what might you feel in that? Discouraged, annoyed, frustrated, right? Think about those feelings that come with that belief. How are you going to behave? Maybe you're going to be really impatient with your client or your patient. You're going to be a little eye rolly. You're maybe going to be maybe like annoyed with them. Okay. So, what types of behaviors? Maybe you're just not working very hard on the case. What might the results then be? So, if we feel no one's redeemable and this is how we think and we feel and behave around them, what might our results be? Right? Our client might relapse, or they might go back into the life, talking about trafficking, those types of things, because they didn't get the support they needed. So, of course, when the results are what our belief initially was, we're just going in circles. Okay. So, thinking about as a team, or again, you can even bring this into your home. What are our beliefs? Okay. And then how, when we have that first belief, do we do things that reassure that versus changing that initial thought and point in our mind? And what I mean by home life, maybe sometimes going home is tough, or sometimes it feels like it's more annoying to go home because our partner doesn't understand. My partner and father of my child is in law enforcement. So you can imagine for us when we're both having a rough day, it's a little rough in our home. But sometimes it's actually really helpful because we understand each other. But what if your belief is like, I don't want to go home. I'm so annoyed with my partner. They don't understand. Okay. So your thoughts might be, they don't understand. I don't want to go home. How are we going to feel? Right? Unloved, annoyed, frustrated, angry. How are we going to behave when we go home? You're going to be maybe mean to your spouse or your kids or your friends, and then the results are going to be, well, we're probably going to get that energy back, which then our belief is reassured. So just taking this and using it for how it might work for you as kind of an assessment or an awareness strategy. I just found this on Instagram and screenshotted it because I loved it. Well, I hated it, which is why I used it technically, because I love the point of it. We need to stop over glamorizing work, please. Or excuse me, glamorizing overworking, please. The absence of sleep, diet, exercise, relaxation, and time with friends and family is not to be applauded. Too many wear burnout as a badge of honor, and it needs to change. So guilty, so guilty. I used to like brag or want people to know, like, I worked 60 hours this week. I worked through lunch. I had to work all weekend. And those are the people that we give kudos to, right? Like, oh my gosh, that person's such a hard worker. They work through lunch every day. And so I think thinking about this a few different ways, one of which check in on that person, right? Um, and also instead of supporting that and being like, good job, which it is, I mean, that's impressive, but instead saying like, take a break, or this isn't healthy, or quit working through lunch, know? Um, I think for me, when I was doing this, it was because I was distracting myself. The busier I was with work and needing to control work and be involved in work, the less I had quiet time to actually think about it. Okay. So if you guys are guilty of this, thinking about for you, is that similar? Is that I overwork all the time because I don't want to sit in my own thoughts and I'm distracting myself, and being busy helps. Okay. Or is there another reason? Do I feel overwhelmed and that if I don't do it, not getting done? Maybe your caseload is just unbalanced behavior. Just rethinking that, okay, and bringing that new mentality or that culture back to the workplace. So buzzing through risk factors here, again, kind of looking at assessing ourselves. What are your own personal vulnerabilities? Do you identify with a marginalized population yourself? Are you a survivor of some type of abuse yourself? Mine, now having a 4-month-old daughter, makes me vulnerable, right? Because I said now I'm having invasive thoughts as I change her diaper. So for yourself, what makes you vulnerable to getting secondary trauma? What grief and loss do you have at work? Again, we've unfortunately lost clients and patients before, right? Maybe your supervisor that was really, really supportive and positive, and someone that you trusted, which we need trust in our field because again, the high responsibility we hold. Maybe they left, okay? And that's a grief, that's a loss too, that's going to impact us. So thinking about those types of things that happen. What direct exposure in your job might you have to trauma or in your personal life? Same with indirect. This is where we're really impacted, right? Because we're constantly hearing the indirect trauma every single day. Where's your current level of empathic strain or compassion fatigue right now? Okay. What does that look like for you in this moment when you're looking at your risk factors? System failure is a big one, right? This is a tough one for me. If you report something and nothing happens, that doesn't mean that the child protective worker isn't doing their job or law enforcement isn't doing their job. There just might not be enough. Okay. So then nothing might happen. Or maybe you know that the client doesn't have the insurance they need for the care you know is going to help them be successful. Or maybe the wait list is a year long in the program you know that they would be successful in. You guys understand system failures, and that absolutely can deplete us of our empathy. What are your current working conditions? Do you work somewhere toxic that, like, oh, it must be nice, Melissa's on vacation again, or not having a supportive supervisor? Or I've worked in so many nonprofits that you feel like you have to beg for a paperclip, right? Where we just don't have the finances to do the job in the way it needs to be done. So thinking about working conditions and sociocultural context of the world. I don't know if you guys have heard of COVID, but certainly that did a number on all of our mental health. Thinking about the war in Ukraine, thinking about the political climate of the world right now, all of these things absolutely impact our own levels of compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. And we pull the sociocultural context into work too, right? Because it directly impacts us at work or the people we work with, so on and so forth. So really taking time to think about these factors here and how they're going to impact us ongoing. Now, switching gears, now that you know what everything is, in a nutshell, I'm going to fly through protective factors, strategies, resources. These are proven to be protective. Okay. They are successful. I know sometimes these things are laughable in our worlds, that they're not possible, but just bear with me because they're proven things that we can all try to just be better at, be creative with. Okay. How can we implement these things in our worlds? Balanced and reasonable caseload. Haha, right? I get it. But hear me out. If we are balanced and reasonable, obviously the clients and patients get better care. We feel better. Our team functions better. If this isn't possible, and I know it's not because one client can feel like 20 sometimes, we all have had those cases. What do we do as a team to help each other feel balanced and make it feel reasonable? When I worked in foster care, I think at that time our caseload was 8 and we would have like 13. Okay. We didn't always have control over that, but are we talking as a team ongoing? Like, how do we balance this out? How do we make this feel reasonable and doable and successful for our clients? So just making sure that's part of the conversation and we're aware of that. Supervision and support. Majority of my jobs, I barely had supervision. That made me burn out really fast. And it made me so stressed out because it's like, am I doing the right thing? I don't know. Nobody's guiding me. I'm not able to check in. So again, if you're in leadership, please, when your team comes in to talk to you, put your phone down, put your computer away, and give them your attention. They need you. I know it's hard. I know we all have so much on our plates, but if we don't have our team and we don't have a team that feels like they have a supervisor to go to, then we have nothing at all. And our clients suffer because we're not healthy. So just understand how important it is to be an approachable, a supportive, and a trustworthy supervisor and someone who makes time. And part of that, when I was a supervisor, is I would dedicate certain days and times each week for each person. So Fridays at 9, it was all team, all staff meeting. And then each person I'd say, okay, pick a day and time that works best for you. And each week, that's when we'll meet. we all know things come up. We live in a world of crises. So we all understand some weeks we'd have to shift it, some weeks it just can't happen. But just knowing Melissa's time is Wednesdays at 3, okay? It's just there is really helpful, and it helps your team feel heard. Acknowledgement too. I did employee of the week, and I took a silly old trophy I had from high school that had like a track person on it. And again, nonprofit. So I took a sticky note and put employee of the week and taped it over like the whatever the trophy was, track trophy was for. And it took 2 minutes to acknowledge each other. And so that's how I would start every meeting is I want to acknowledge so and so this week. This is why. And then that person who got it the next week got to give it out. And it became a really fun thing. People would add stuff to the trophy each week. The first week, the track hand ended up having a little mini like taco sticker in the hand. And then from there, everyone added something. So it adds fun and humor to the job too, as well as acknowledging staff and making time for them. Time away from high stress work. Vacation is hard for us, right? And especially doing it without our cell phone or an email on. But I'm encouraging you all to try. I'm encouraging you all to be supportive of each other when we're on vacation. Again, if we have that must be nice mentality, that doesn't feel good for people who earn and deserve vacation. So how can we support each other to take a real vacation at work? And sometimes it's not even about vacation. It can be, I years ago took my email notifications off my phone completely. Trust me, I know I have a million emails to check. I don't need a constant reminder, especially at 8 o'clock at night when I'm supposed to be home with my family. So just think about things like that. How can I actually take time away? Again, my partner being in law enforcement, we like to watch murder documentaries. I just watched again the Jeffrey Epstein documentary. It's like I'm not taking time away from high stress work when that is what I'm doing literally after work. Social support outside of work. My best friends are social workers and cops. What do you think we talk about over beer after work? More work. So thinking about how to hold each other accountable to that. Maybe it's if you guys do enjoy grabbing food or drinks with your team, just saying the first person to bring up work has to take the bill. I don't know, whatever it works for you. Also, your social supports outside of work need to be people that you don't work with. So making sure that you also have a group of people or a support that isn't job related. That's so important to really take time for those people, and just it relaxes our mind. We're not always in go work mode. Adequate training we talked about, not only for this topic, but for how to do my job in general. And then can we diversify responsibilities? So when I first was able to start working on these compassion fatigue trainings, I was still working in North Dakota, and the director of the task force said to me, I know you're passionate about this topic, and I think it's very directly related to the work. So I'm going to make it a part of your job. So I didn't have to only talk about human trafficking 100% of the time. I love it. That's my job. That's my passion. But instead of 100% of the time talking about this depressing, sad, traumatic thing, it was 70% of the time. And now I could dedicate 30% of my time to this topic. And so if you're in leadership, how can we instill that or diversify, different things on the team? And if you want to advocate for yourself as an employee, I'd really like to incorporate this into my job. It would give me a break from all the trauma, but it's also still benefiting my agency. So getting creative with these factors. So when we're making changes, things to focus on, assess where we're at. Okay, we're going to talk about that next a little bit. What are our warning signs? What strategies? And develop our plan. So I'm going to buzz through these things very fast. Here's some examples of self-assessments. These are in the resources. You guys have them. I would highly encourage you to take these. I would highly encourage you to have them at your agencies too. It just helps connect what's draining us, to the percentage of time that takes up in a day, as well as our somatic connections. I get migraines when I'm really stressed. Oftentimes what we do is just say, oh, I get migraines. Oh, I get backaches. And we don't actually connect those things to our work. And you all know the connection between mind and body. Okay. So not including yourself in that, because oftentimes it's again, pull myself up by my bootstraps, but really starting to connect with what stress and what at work is causing ailments in me. Okay. So taking time for these types of assessments. Another one is your ACEs, your adverse child scores, right? We all have that. That adds to our personal vulnerabilities. So even assessing if you haven't done your own ACE score, I would highly suggest doing that. Here's an example in terms of somatic. What might stress feel like? So do you guys have some of these things? So again, for me, I get jaw tension, I get migraines, I get a lot of like stomach cramps, okay, exhaustion. So looking through these and just saying, wow, I've kind of just written this off as who I am, but could this actually be directly related to the work I'm doing? And then how are we going to combat that? Another example, there's tons of apps. I also put this in your resources. You can put on your phone. This is a really great one. For example, you can do an assessment once a week. It gives you exercise, meditation. You can put a countdown to something you're really looking forward to on your phone. So this is one example of something on your phone you could use as a strategy just to keep yourself accountable, and then it's right there. I love Insight Timer. It's meditation. And whether you have 5 minutes or an hour, you can pick tons of categories. And I also do this on YouTube. I'm really impatient and have a short attention span. But one thing I try to do is like, I have 5 minutes to meditate, okay, whatever that means for you. Sometimes that means I drive in the car with no sound. Sometimes that means I pull up a YouTube for 5 minutes and say, okay, I want to meditate today on positive energy. There's going to be something on that. So just make time for those things too. Another strategy, we want to understand our warning signs, okay? When are we good? When do we feel good? When are we great with our clients and our patients? When are we excited to go home? How are we in green? Okay. What happens in yellow? For me, the yellow is what happened to me when I started bawling, and said she's going to die. It's this irrational, like emotional response to things. And I start getting really impatient and eye rolly. Like my sister might say, oh my gosh, my daughter wouldn't eat her peas at supper. I was so frustrated. And when I'm just getting to the end of my rope in my head, unfortunately, I'll be like, okay, well, was she sexually abused today? Probably not. So it's not that bad. And I hate saying that, but hopefully you guys relate to that too, where you just are like, there's bigger problems in the world than your child not eating their peas. Okay. That's my yellow, is when I start getting cynical and crabby about that. Funny, but not funny. My red is emotional eating. I love eating crappy food. Again, I'm a busy, distracting person. So I had a supervisor once. I was really stressed out working on something in the break room. We always got donuts donated. And I was like cramming donuts, typing, blah, blah, blah. And my supervisor came over and pulled the box of donuts away. And I looked up at her and I had like a full mouth of donut. And she goes, "You've had 6." And I tell this story all the time because I just, for one, like, how do you eat 6 donuts and not even realize it? But that's what I do. And that is my red. It's like, wow, like I'm so overwhelmed that I literally ate 6 full donuts and didn't notice. So look at your warning signs. Not only do this with yourself, do this at home, do this with your team at work, because their answers for what they think your warning signs are going to be much different than your own. And you all become much more aware. Okay. So whether someone says, boy, when you're in your yellow or red, this is what I think your yellow and red is. And you might say, no, actually, this is my yellow and red. So you become more aware and more supportive of each other when you just can be open to these conversations, because sometimes it's very hard to hear, and also do this at home. Okay. And then thinking about, with your warning signs, connecting that to, what is the worst part of my job? How do I avoid or delay the worst part of my job? And what feelings are you avoiding? Because that can also be directly related to your warning signs of when things start to get into that yellow. If we're starting to see things at work happen that we feel like are the worst parts. So just some way to assess yourself, and then do this at home and at work. What drove me crazy is on the right side. This is what I was told in so many jobs. Well, you get a raise this year. Oh, we're bringing in a free masseuse for 5-minute massages next month. You will have Taco Tuesdays. You can wear jeans on Fridays. Just take time off. It'll be fine. Those are all great things that we all want, right? But it has to be paired with things like culture change at work, right? Normalizing compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. Providing EAP and mental health plans and talking about them, right? Encouraging vacation, encouraging talking about it and having supervision, having team staffing, encouraging fun, activities and exercise. So we need them all together. But typically what we get is just the fluffy stuff. Okay. Which is great. That helps acknowledge the work we do. And we all want to be acknowledged and appreciated, but we also need the not fluffy stuff that really makes change. Here's another great tool. You guys have this resource, so I'm not going to dig into it, but I love it. This is something you can utilize in your office. Basically, it's being self-aware, like I talked about that word vomit in the beginning. So, being self-aware, giving someone a warning that you have something you need to talk about, making sure they're in a place by getting consent from them, and then ask yourself, what do I really need to disclose to help, to get their help staff in this case or to process this? Like, what am I going to say that might damage them? Because again, even though they work in this field, that doesn't mean that we should talk about it at lunch. That doesn't mean that I haven't heard stories from my colleagues that have been burned in my brain forever that I would have been fine not knowing, okay, even though I do this work every day. So this is something to certainly utilize and normalize at work. Shifting to home life again, kind of in that warning zone again, thinking about, have you asked your loved ones and friends what it's like to be around you when you're in yellow or red? And what would they say? Again, that was hard for me to hear when I did this, but it was so dang helpful for everybody. What would they say about how you transition from work to home? What would they say about the impact hard stories have on you, but also on them? We need to have mutual empathy for each other because although I get frustrated with my partner that I'm alone on Christmas, how do you think he feels having to work on Christmas being in law enforcement, right? So again, we need to have empathy for both sides of things, of how they feel having a horrific traumatic case at work, but then how we feel having to kind of deal with ourselves or with them when they come home. We need to have those conversations. And then do you have self-awareness about your warning signs? Okay. What do we do to restock and reset? That's what we're doing now. Hot walk and talk. I love this. It sounds corny, but I promise it's great. The cops I work with love this too. Basically, in that low impact debriefing type of example, you might start seeing that happen where someone's getting worked up or stressed or frustrated. So just saying, hey, Melissa, why don't you grab your bottle of water and let's take a walk? You all know, being mental health professionals, that scientifically, if we walk and if we drink cold water, it automatically kind of calms us down. And so encouraging this with one another. My colleague and I, when we used to get frustrated at leadership or we'd get frustrated about a case, we would do this with each other and we would just walk around the block and bring our water or coffee with, okay, and just take a breather, come back, and then it's like, okay, I'm good now, I'm fine, I processed it, I didn't need to throw my negativity all over the break room. So how can we utilize this at work too? Sleep is always overlooked, and it sounds obvious to talk about, but again, a lot of people like to self-medicate, and then they'll say, oh my gosh, I slept so great, I sleep great every night, I have 4 beers and a whiskey. But as many of you know, when we're under the influence, we don't go into REM sleep. And that is what we need. We need that REM sleep to get rejuvenated, to be able to perform, for our memory to not be impacted, right? We need to rejuvenate our bodies and our minds. And that's what sleep is for. So, of course, when we don't get sleep, we get health issues, we have anxiety, right? We get sleep disorders. When we have the adequate amount of sleep, as you might guess, this improves everything. And so, of course, that's also going to improve the way you work, okay? The way you retain information, your resilience, all of that stuff, your productivity. So, encouraging this, and it might just be, okay, instead of sitting on TikTok till midnight, I'm going to sit on TikTok till 9:30. Okay, it's little things like that. Sometimes we work overnights, we work on call. I understand, but just try to really have more focus on sleep. And another one I just added because I do think it's very important to talk about is spirituality. We don't always lean on this enough when we need it, and I think just getting a better idea for ourselves, like how can this help my resilience? It helps replenish us. It helps us connect to ourselves. Okay, so kind of what is your belief in higher power or lack thereof? Whatever spirituality means to you is great. For some people, it's being out in nature, it's meditating, it's prayer, it's just having silence and unplugging from the world. Okay. So just making sure we don't forget about spirituality pieces when we're talking about our resiliency plan. Fun and laughter, you can probably see I try to laugh at myself a lot when I do this. I try to add funny memes because it's important to do this at work and at home. At one of my jobs, we had a bulletin board, and it was for 2 reasons. One, it was fun. So we would post memes and stuff like this in the break room. It was also to appreciate and acknowledge one another. Like if I saw a colleague do something really great, I would write it out and put it on the bulletin board. So it was just a mixture of laughter and acknowledgement. And it's so easy to do that. Okay. So how can we do more of this? Because as you all know, laughing and smiling is the best medicine. So making sure that that doesn't get lost, because oftentimes we lose hobbies, we lose just frankly smiling and laughter when we get really cynical and exhausted. And self-compassion sounds obvious, but we do not give ourselves enough compassion for the tough things we see are really hard jobs. And so just letting go of this, like, we have to be perfect, we have to win, we can't be weak, we're always the strong one. Like, give yourself grace. My sister even gave me a bracelet that says grace on it, and everyone's like, is that your daughter's name? No, it's my sister saying, for the love of God, Melissa, like, give yourself a break. You are so hard on yourself. Give yourself grace. So I wanted to tell you all of that too, right? We need to have more self compassion and just acknowledging the hard work you guys do. This I won't have time for, but please look at this. The Children's Advocacy Center in North Dakota has excellent resources, as does Tend in the corner there. And if you hover your mouse over each of these, when you go to this website, it tells you what they are. So you could email this out to everybody, and say, hey, do one of these this week, and then we'll talk about it in our staff meeting, or just having this, again, culture change around using these resources. I love, love, love this website. And some of these we talked about today, some of them we didn't. And from here, you guys might find some that you really want to implement into your own planning. So now with the last few minutes, really switching as an organization. So if you're in leadership, are there changes you can make? If you're not in leadership, are there changes you can advocate for? So understandably so, the barriers to incorporating compassion fatigue and secondary trauma in the workplace are people don't acknowledge it's a problem, or there's not any buy-in, okay? There's resources for this, but we don't know that they exist, or we haven't looked into them. Do you live in a rural community? We talked about rural communities yesterday, and that can really be a barrier sometimes to some of these things. However, COVID and Zoom and Skype and stuff has helped. And then is there funding and sustainability for those things? As you can imagine, when we implement this culture change, our well-being is better. Everyone is excited to go to work. We save money because people aren't out sick, or we're not constantly having a turnover of new people we need to train in. Our clients get the support they need. Our workplace is healthy with great boundaries. We have resiliency, and we get the recognition, for the work that we're doing. So it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it to look at these things and say, okay, what can we change? What can we do? My biggest thing is, how are we responding? What do we do? And I think that training and onboarding is crucial. Okay. So again, that culture right out the gate, this is how we are at work. We support these things. We're not toxic, so on and so forth. And I think too, thinking about what policies or lack thereof influence the staff wellness. We should include policies that help for that. And then understanding that compassion fatigue is not a shortcoming or an issue of a person or a staff, right? It's an organization, or it's a hazard. It's an occupational hazard. So thinking about that, shifting that differently. I think too, when we train our team and our organizations, including survivors as trainers, for one, you're being a survivor focused, survivor led, but that shows the reward of like, wow, like what we do matters, because look at this survivor speaking to us or training us. So, reminding people of the reward, or acknowledging them, because here's a survivor that is, now able to provide some education. It gives that sense of purpose. And then, are we collaborating with partners? We want to cross-discipline train with our partners. We want to all, as a community, be an example. We all want to support each other, because as a team, if we function as a team, that's how we best help our clients. So we want to be agents of change in this work. And then these are just questions to think about, maybe take a picture if it helps you ponder. What are your first steps to take as an organization? Or maybe you're not in leadership. You say, okay, who can I take this to that I think will really understand, or really maybe have some say or some buy-in here? What can I do today, right, to go back to the workplace? Maybe it's email out that website I just showed you to everybody, or whatever it might be. So then lastly, remembering the rewards of the work. If you guys want to type in the chat, please do, but this is something to bring back to your team as well. Why did we sign up for this work? What do we love about our job? Whose lives have we touched through the work that we do? And what do we bring to the work? Thinking about myself, what do I bring that's unique? What do I bring that clients might appreciate, or my team might appreciate? So just remembering why we signed up is so important, because we forget sometimes. Lastly, For me, I do this. My favorite color is green, so I have a million yellow sticky notes for all the things I got to do. But green are my affirmations, what I'm grateful for this week. Maybe a client drew you a picture. Is that up in your office? Or maybe I write down, why am I here? What makes me want to be here this week? And so I write these things on my green sticky notes. Or maybe you take sticky notes and put something nice about your colleague and put that in their office or their cubicle if you still work, in the office. So just thinking about, these little visual reminders, that is something really short and sweet you can do today. Here's some great references and resources if you are interested in some of what I use today. And otherwise, because of course I work in human trafficking, I have to have a sarcastic Liam Neeson meme. But here's how you can find me and get a hold of me anytime. Like I said, I flew through so much today. So if there's questions, if you want more training or consulting, that's what I'm here for, on all things trafficking and compassion fatigue and developing teams. So please reach out. I'd love to hear from you all. Otherwise, I have a few minutes if there are questions that you all might have or comments. Julia, anything you've seen for questions or comments? I'm buzzing through now too.
Hey, Melissa, that was so amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh,
We have
of course.
a few questions in the chat, one of which I'm sure lots of people have are the website for your North Dakota Children's advocacy was covered. We couldn't quite see it on the slide.
Oh,
Is it
shoot.
possible to pop
Okay.
that into the chat?
I will do that. I will type it in now. And then I'll also add, I told you guys about a YouTube video I think is excellent. It's a documentary. Part of it, they showed me talking about compassion fatigue. It's geared towards medical providers. However, it's really just about the helping profession. And I think it's fantastic. So I'll put that in the chat too. What other questions do you have?
Okay, so we have another one. As you know, a lot of people who are joining our summit have their own lived experience, and that's what makes them so amazing to be able to do this work. So we had a question around when you have vast amounts of lived experience that mirror your work, how do you help to avoid that constant fight, flight, or freeze state due to secondary trauma?
That is so difficult for all of us, isn't it? I think, and some of you might have answers to that too. So please absolutely put that in the chat if you have thoughts on what you do. When I have more time, I do that. We talk a lot about like, so how do we avoid that? And a lot of times it's geared towards intentionality, which is so hard because it's more about like discipline of the mind. But when we have these invasive thoughts, what do we do about that? And for me, what I talk about is really honing in on this plan. When you have an intervention plan with yourself, it's asking yourself that question on like, how can I better avoid that happening? And for me, I've had to go through my mental health provider and really work through that because I couldn't do it on my own. To answer that question, I had to go to another professional, or maybe it's something you talk about in your team if you're comfortable. For how do we do this? How do you guys handle this? Because it's going to be different for everybody, and I'm not really answering that well. But that's because I think it's a challenge for me as well. I certainly just doing the work.
I love that. And I think, like that visual of like red, yellow, green to be able to reflect, right, when you're in a calm state, because so often you're in it all the time. Like, how
Mhm.
do we find those calmer moments to do that reflection or
Yeah.
dive deep in there? Another question that came up was so do you create inner office? And I think you touched on this, but do you create inner office work, debrief, counseling to share or talk about these instances, or do you seek outside help?
Say that again. Sorry, I feel like I didn't understand it.
Sorry. So they were asking, so when hard instances come up, are you creating spaces within your office place to sort of debrief around this, which I know you've touched on, or do you sort of recommend seeking that outside help?
Both. I think absolutely when hard things happen, they should be talked about at work because it's the elephant in the room. And if one person's struggling, I think certainly someone else might be. And I think we all work in the mental health profession field. And what blows my mind, and you guys will know this too, so many times, even though we work in mental health, we're not supportive of our own mental health in the workplace. And so I absolutely recommend it's something that should be talked about with everybody. And then the help should be offered, or maybe even increasing the help. Like, hey, we have an EAP, but I'm actually also going to bring them into the office next week, and these are the hours they're going to be here if you guys want to sign up with them. Something like that, where we can even twofold kind of increase that, resend out that resource, those types of things.
Amazing. And I think this last question segues right in, because we know that so often the caregivers are the worst at taking care of themselves. How do you stay current in your own mental health practices?
Great question. I appreciate that. Counseling. I go once a week right now, but as we know, that comes and goes. But because I just had my daughter, I've needed it. So for me, it's counseling. I have been way better. I used to have 3 cell phones with my jobs. I now have 1. Um, I think for me too, I have to, when I'm driving places, I don't have any music in my car, or I don't call people, because that sometimes is the only time I give my mind a break, right? I'm not distracting myself with something. So it's kind of like my meditation space. And then I call my family once a week. That's a big one for me. I still play volleyball and basketball. My partner still plays hockey. So in all of our free time, we still make sure to watch our kiddos so the other one can go do those hobbies.
I love that. Well, I think we are just at time. I'm going to ask people to make sure they fill out the evaluation link, which you can find on the horizontal toolbar right above the puzzle piece. So it is, if you're looking from the bottom up, the second one, it looks like a little piece of paper with check marks, or it's the second from the bottom. And Melissa, thank you so much. You are getting so much love in the chat. I think that
Oh,
this topic
good.
resonates with everyone. So many people agreeing with you. Lots of guilty eaters out there.
I
Like
love hate that, right? I love that for me, but
filler
not for all of us. Yes.
fillers. So thank you so much for elevating this really important topic and spending time with us here today.
Well, I'm kind of breezing through now, and I really appreciate you guys taking time out to hear me today. So keep in touch. I'd love to hear from you, and have a great rest of your summit.